All right, if your computer's open, go ahead and close it. You can finish your warm-up when we're done going over our notes. Okay, so what we're going to look at today is kind of a little different than what we've done the last couple days. Okay, yesterday we went over LCM. So from your warm-up, question number 2 was asking you, when would you need to use the concept of least common multiple that we learned yesterday? What are we going to end up doing with fractions soon that often kids don't look forward to that requires us to find LCM? Any idea? What are we going to have to review? You did it in 4th and 5th grade, but what are we going to do with fractions soon? There's not that much you can do with fractions. That is going to require us to find a common multiple. Any idea? Remember, there's kind of only 4 things we can do in math. What might we be doing with fractions soon that's going to require us to find a common multiple, a least common multiple? What are you thinking, Mateo? No, thank goodness. You're on the right track, though. Okay, I prefer multiplying and dividing fractions because I don't have to do this. So what operations would we be doing that we have to find a least common multiple for? If it's not multiplying and dividing, what is it? Only 2 other options. Jordan. Yes. Okay. Adding and subtracting fractions usually tends to be a little more difficult for kids because you have to find a common denominator. Well, your least common multiple is your common denominator. So that's what we will be using LCM for. Okay. So that was your question 2 on your warm-up. And then question 3 asked you to find the least common multiple for 14 and 21. Sorry, I almost gave you the answer. For 14 and 21, the least common multiple would be 42. You may have answered something else and it might be a common multiple, but the least common multiple for 14 and 21 would be 42. Okay, so going on to what we're doing today, rates and ratios. Okay, when you hear the word rate, may not be exactly what we're going to discuss today, but what comes to your mind if someone asked you for a rate? What do you typically kind of correspond or think of that when someone asks you for a rate? Leah?
Like rate them, like one at a time.
Okay, someone else mentioned that. Actually, someone else mentioned a doctor's office. Like when you go to the doctor's office and there's something wrong with you, they'll say, rate this on a scale of 1 to 10. Someone mentioned like rating movies or video games, whether it's 1 to 10 or 4 stars or 5 stars. Same idea. Mateo?
Give an opinion on something.
Give an opinion on something is to rate something? Sure. Okay. Now, what we're going to look at today dealing with rate is slightly different than those ideas. Okay. And this is where things sometimes get confusing because we have an idea of our mind what rate means. Okay. And everything we've mentioned and been mentioned in my other classes is like a scale. Okay. Rate this on a scale of 1 to 10 or rate this 4 stars, 5 stars, that type of thing. What we're going to look at today is slightly different. Okay. Rate, what we're going to look at today is dealing with ratios. So, how many, well, I know you all run because you have to if you've had PE class. Okay. Your rate is how many like miles an hour you are running. Okay. So you may go out and run the triangle twice, or I think when you run the mile, you run to Wisconsin and back in like 7-8 minutes. Okay. So that would be your rate, 1 mile in 7 minutes. When you're driving a car, what is our rate for that? Leah, you have water falling out. Driving a car, what do you see on a white sign as you're driving down the road? That's a rate. How is cars' rates written? Jordan? Yes, which is what? Scarlett?
Miles.
per
Hours.
hour. Okay? 65 miles per hour. Okay, that's a ratio. Miles in hours. All right. Where else might we see rates or ratios like that? I usually think of time and distance. Okay. Mateo, you think of something else?
Like a swimming contest or something?
Okay. Speed again. All right. A lot of times we think of speed as being a rate or a ratio. So that's more what we're talking about in math than like rating something as good or bad. All right. So a ratio is when you're comparing two quantities that are different kinds of units. Okay. Miles in an hour. Number of points scored in a quarter. Points scored in a half. Okay. They are comparing two things, but the units are different. All right. When you're driving a car, you're looking at miles compared to an hour. All right. We'll go over a question soon if you're typing. Used to way back when I was in high school. All right. We took a typing class and they want to know how many words you could type in a minute. So words compared to minutes. That's why most people my age and older can type pretty well because that was a class that we took. We learned how to type. All right. So your ratio is comparing two things, but the units are different. Kind of like when your parents will say you're comparing apples to oranges. Okay, that's a ratio. They're two different things that you're comparing. A unit rate, okay, has a denominator of 1 unit when the rate is written as a fraction. So a unit rate is always going to be written as a fraction, and the denominator is always going to be 1. Okay, so listen to this statement. I just always think of running for some reason. If you can run for 30 minutes and you run 3 miles in 30 minutes, how long did it take you to run 1 mile? I'll say it again. If you go out running, you run for 30 minutes. If you can run 3 miles in 30 minutes, how long did it take you to run 1 mile? Jordan? 10 minutes. Okay? If you're running 3 miles in 30 minutes, you're running 1 mile in 10 minutes. Okay? So that's a unit rate. It's a denominator of 1, and it's written as a fraction. Okay? So then I kind of gave you an example of all those. This would be a ratio, like 15 to 5. Ratios are written with a colon, as I have here. As a rate, 15 characters in 5 seconds. That's a rate because we're comparing two things that are not the same. Characters in typing is not the same as seconds. Then to change it to a unit rate, we have to have a denominator of 1. 5 divided by 5 gives me 1. Whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. So 15 divided by 5 is 3. So if I can type 15 characters in 5 seconds, that means I can type 3 characters in 1 second. Then, using this unit rate, I could find out how many characters I could type in 20 seconds. I could find out how many characters I could type in 60 seconds. Because I know every second I'm typing 3 characters. So I can always find out other rates based on my unit rate. Okay? Now I'm going to give you another example of something you've possibly experienced where you'll see unit rates often. Okay? How many of you have ever been to Sam's or Costco with a family member? All right? When you go in there, the purpose of going in there is to buy things for cheaper. But you have to buy a lot of them. All right? You can't go in there and buy 1 roll of paper towel. You want that? You better go to CVS, Strax, or somewhere like that. The purpose of going to Sam's or Costco is to buy what's called bulk, which is supposed to be cheaper for you. So next time you're in Sam's, possibly Costco, if you look at all the white price signs throughout Sam's, they will give you the cost of buying that bulk item. Let's say your parents are looking at buying paper towel and there's 16 rolls in this bulk item. Also on that white price label, it's going to give you a unit price or unit rate. Okay? They will figure out for you what one roll is going to cost you. The reason why people want to know that is they want to know, is it really cheaper for me to go to Sam's and buy 16 of them? Or is it cheaper for me to go to a smaller store and buy one roll at a time? So unit rate is something you will use often, especially as an adult. Okay? When you buy gas, you want to know how many miles to a gallon is your car getting? Okay? When you purchase a car, you really want to look at that. Okay? That's a unit rate. How many miles can I drive on one single gallon of gas? Obviously, you want to go a lot of miles on 1 gallon because that's more cost efficient to you. Unit rate you will use often, especially as an adult, when it's your money you're spending. Okay? So ratio is written as a comparison with a colon. Rates are written as fractions. Unit rates are also fractions, but your denominator is 1. Okay? Any questions about what rate and ratios are? Maybe not how to find it. We're going to do examples of that. All right? When we're talking about today is not rating things on a scale. It's a comparison. All right? So let's look at some examples together. And yes, we're writing these down. And yes, you're showing me when you leave. So if we went to a basketball game and there was a ratio of points and quarters, 44 to 4. Okay, that's how we would write a ratio. 44 points and 4 quarters. To write that as a rate, it needs to be a fraction. Okay, Jordan, what do you think it is? What's that? We'll get there in a sec. You're doing unit rate. We got to do a step in between. You're one step ahead of me, bud. So we would have 44 points on top and 4 quarters on the bottom. Now I'm abbreviating. That's a rate. It's a comparison of two things that are not the same, written as a fraction. 44 points and 4 quarters. Questions on where I got that from? Then, to change it to a unit rate, that means my denominator needs to be 1. So now I have 1 quarter. So I have to figure out how many points would they have scored in 1 quarter. So what do I do to 4 to turn it into 1? If it's getting smaller, you're either dividing or subtracting. And I promise we're not subtracting. What do we do to 4 to turn it into 1? Look at my example above if that helps. Look and see what we did up here. That should help you figure out what we're going to do down here. That's why we do examples. Jordan? What are we going to divide by? 4 divided by what gives you 1? Yep. If you divide the denominator by 4, we're going to divide the numerator by 4. So now, Jordan, how many points did they score in a quarter? This is what you gave me earlier. Yep. This is a rate, comparing two things that are not the same. This is a unit rate because the denominator is 1. A unit rate will always have a denominator of 1. Questions? We'll do another one. All right. If we have this really super fast animal, probably like a cheetah or an ostrich, and they are running 125 feet in 5 seconds. Okay, that would be a ratio, 125 to 5. To turn that into a rate, it has to be a fraction. Okay, so you're going to have your feet on the top, your seconds on the bottom. And it was the same numbers, 125 to 5. You're just turning it into a fraction. A rate is a fraction comparing two things that are not the same. Then, to get a unit rate, we want to know how many feet did this crazy fast animal run in 1 second. A unit rate always has a denominator of 1. So, Mateo, what do I have to do to change 5 to 1? Divide by 5. And if I divide the denominator by 5, what am I dividing the numerator by? Perfect. Okay, we know how fast this animal is running in 5 seconds. We want to find out how fast it's running in 1 second. So, Mateo, how fast is this crazy animal running in a second? 25 feet. That's a unit rate because the denominator is 1. Now, you guys will be allowed to use either your computer calculator or a handheld, not a phone, to do these divisions. Okay, I'm not teaching division, I'm not testing division. I already did that. I want to know, can we change a rate into a unit rate? So you can use a calculator. Your calculator isn't going to know what to do. You have to actually type it. Okay, so this is where now you can start using calculators when I tell you you can. Because like I said, I'm not testing your division. I'm testing to see if you know how to change a rate into a unit rate. Okay, so if you have not got, all you need is a basic calculator. We are doing nothing fancy. Your calculator needs to be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. That is it. Okay, so it can be as basic as they come. You will be able to use those to help you figure this out. All right. Any questions on switching a rate to a unit rate? We're just dividing. Okay, so I want to explain a few things on your assignment, but I know it takes a few minutes and we get a little noisy while doing this. So go ahead and carefully tear out page 35. Remember, if you tear straight up from the middle, it tears easier than tearing to the side. Okay, usually I have to start it a little bit at the top. Then if you tear out from the middle, it tears out easy. Look on the agenda for Wednesday. What does it say? 35. Always check the agenda. And then I want to go over a few things with page 35. Make sure you put first and last name, and then where it says my homework, write a 4, fourth hour, fourth period. I need a 4. First and last name, though. You can nicely cross off number 8. Like I always say, we don't need to be a savage and destroy number 8. Just nicely cross off number 8. Make sure your first and last name's on it. And then a 4 goes in my homework line. If you happen to not finish this in class, you can finish it at home. You do not have to give it to me before you walk out of here today. Okay? So, 1, 2, 3, and 4. You are just taking the ratio that they give you. I would write it as a rate and then as a unit rate, just like we did our 2 examples. So for 1, 2, and 3, and 4, you'll have 2 different fractions. The original fraction, and then when you changed it to a unit rate. Remember, unit rate denominator has to be 1. That is our definition. Number 5 is asking you, which driver drove the fastest? So you are going to have to figure out 3 different unit rates. You will have to figure out what Cutright's unit rate was, what Evans' unit rate was, and what Loza's unit rate was. So you will basically end up with 6 fractions for number 5. And then you'll know who's the fastest. You do not have to explain on number 5. You can cross off the words explain. 6 and 7, you're just finding unit rate. And then the same thing for 9. So all of these, you're starting with a ratio, changing it to a rate, which is a fraction, and then changing it to a unit rate. You can use a calculator for the division. And you may end up with a decimal. That's fine. Okay, these aren't true fractions. This is a unit rate. You might have a decimal as your numerator, and that is fine. Any questions about what you're doing? 35, 1 to 9, we're skipping 8. Make sure your first and last name's on it, and you have a 4 with my homework. If you get that done in class, I would work on R1, 2, and 3. That basically goes with what we just covered. Any questions?